In standard criminal investigations, suspects are sought out based on if they have a motive in which they benefit from the crime in question, if they have an opportunity to commit or be involved in the crime, if there is evidence connecting the suspects to the crime. Keeping these three factors in mind, let's consider the actions of Vice President Dick Cheney and his personal associates surrounding the 9/11 attack. For decades during the Cold War, the U.S. military-industrial complex had been funneling billions of dollars of U.S. budget into Pentagon defense contractors in a military escalation aimed at protecting America from Soviet communism. With the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Pentagon found itself faced with massive budget cuts because it had no enemy to justify the cost of maintaining its budget. The Pentagon needed a new enemy to start a war that could be sustained for a lifetime. At the same time, major U.S. oil companies were spending billions buying oil resources in the Caspian Sea region, but without a way to transport these oil supplies to a new market opening in China, they had no way to recoup their investments. Dick Cheney's dual history as Secretary of Defense under Bush Sr. and as CEO of Halliburton made him a direct link between the energy company elite and the Pentagon. In 1997, Dick Cheney led a consortium of energy companies, including Unocal and Enron, who stood to make billions of dollars by building an oil pipeline through Afghanistan in order to sell their gas to a new market in China. But the Taliban, who were in power in Afghanistan, refused to allow the pipeline deal. The official spokesman said that the pipeline could not happen until the Taliban were removed from power. Dick Cheney, Don Rumsfeld, and others who would hold key positions in the Bush administration found the conservative think tank the Project for a New American Century. In September of 2000, they submitted their manifesto, Rebuilding America's Defenses. This report suggests that although the United States faces no global rival, the U.S. military should prepare to rapidly deploy and win multiple simultaneous large-scale wars and set up an enduring American military presence in the Persian Gulf. Chapter 5 admits this would take a long time absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. The 2000 Republican National Convention nominates George W. Bush for president and Dick Cheney as vice president and began a campaign largely funded by Enron. In August, Cheney quits his CEO position at Halliburton, taking a $30 million severance package. In the 2000 election in Florida, Governor Jeb Bush knowingly used a faulty felon purge list to prevent at least 57,000 mostly black Democrats from voting. When that was still not enough to win the election, the Bushes used their influence on the Supreme Court to overstep the jurisdiction and stop the recount. According to Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill, Bush and Cheney began planning for a war in the Middle East in their first National Security Council meeting, and Cheney's Energy Task Force began holding private meetings with Enron executives to study maps of Iraq's oil reserves. Dick Cheney also reopened the pipeline negotiations with the Taliban, but this time the original financial offer was accompanied by threats of military action if the pipeline was not allowed. The Taliban was told, "You either accept our offer of a carpet of gold, or we'll bury you under a carpet of bombs."
The Bush administration began receiving specific warnings of an impending al-Qaeda attack, but rather than passing these warnings on to the FAA or other agencies,
in January 2001, the administration issued an order to the FBI protecting the bin Laden family and Saudi suspects in the U.S. from an investigation. In May 2001, another Bush directive puts Dick Cheney in charge of managing all training exercises throughout the entire federal government and all military agencies. Dick Cheney then schedules multiple military exercises that are remarkably similar to the 9/11 attack, including hijacked airliners, a plane crashing into a building, an attack on New York, and inserted false blips onto military radar screens, all scheduled to happen simultaneously on the morning of September 11th. Since 1997, there are standard operating procedures set in place concerning how to respond to the hijacking of commercial flights. This happens on a regular basis. From September 2000 to June 2001, 67 planes steered off course. All 67 times, our air defenses worked as they should, and intercepts were launched. But in June 2001, Donald Rumsfeld changes these procedures to require special approval from the Secretary of Defense before any military aircraft may respond to a crisis. In the first week of September 2001, 2 U.S. carrier battle groups arrived just off the Pakistani coast, while 17,000 U.S. troops are deployed to Egypt for Operation Bright Star. 2 U.S. carrier battle groups arrived just off the Pakistani coast, while 17,000 U.S. troops are deployed to Egypt for Operation Bright Star. 2 U.S. carrier battle groups arrived just off the Pakistani coast, while 17,000 U.S. troops are deployed to Egypt for Operation Bright Star. Diplomats from Pakistan and India report that the U.S. Special Forces are gathering in Kazakhstan, preparing for a full-scale invasion of Afghanistan. September 9th, just 2 days before the attack, the plans to go to war with the Taliban to begin in October 2001 were ready for President Bush to sign into action. It's important to point out that at this time, although war with Afghanistan seems inevitable, the Bush administration still had no justification for military action against Afghanistan, while they continued to ignore and suppress intelligence warnings of an imminent al-Qaeda attack. September 11th, 2001. Air traffic controllers are aware of the first possible hijacking at about 8:15 a.m., and the last flight crashed at about 10 o'clock. During this time, almost all top officials in charge of civilian and military defense chain of command are curiously absent from any decision-making capacity, with the exception of Dick Cheney, who was overseeing the multiple military exercises he scheduled for that morning and running a completely separate command system, which superseded orders being issued from the National Military Command Center.
According to the testimony of Secretary of Transportation Norm Mineta to the 9/11 Commission,
Dick Cheney not only lied about the time he arrived at the PEOC bunker, but he was aware for at least 12 minutes beforehand that a flight was heading for the Pentagon and made no effort to warn or evacuate the Pentagon, opening up speculation of a stand-down order. And in reference to United Flight 93, Dick Cheney's version of when he issued shoot-down authorization is directly contradicted by Richard Clark and the heads of NEADS, NORAD, and the NMCC, again opening speculation on whether United 93 was shot down. The September 11th attack gave Bush and Cheney the very new Pearl Harbor they needed to use the awaiting Afghanistan war plans, and the invasion starts right on schedule in October before producing any hard evidence connecting Osama bin Laden to the attack. The Taliban was quickly overthrown, and the Bush administration picks Afghanistan's new leader, Hamid Karzai, who was a consultant for Unocal. Less than a year later, the $3.2 billion construction contract to build the long-awaited pipeline through Afghanistan was awarded to Halliburton subsidiary Bordero Shaw and Saudi bin Laden Group's H.C. Price. Also, as a direct result of the 9/11 attack, Congress passed the War Powers Act, allowing executive branch to declare preemptive war on any nation vaguely defined as a threat to America, which was used to extend the war to Iraq by falsely connecting Saddam Hussein to 9/11. Defense spending has now far surpassed the Cold War budget in a never-ending war on terrorism. The Patriot Act and the Homeland Security Bill were passed, nullifying many constitutional rights and protections while granting the executive branch an unprecedented level of secrecy and unaccountability. Claiming the absolute power of commander-in-chief during war, Bush has also legalized the use of torture on prisoners being held without the right of habeas corpus, and has tried to justify the electronic spying on Americans that he started before 9/11.
Dick Cheney also claims that his office is unaccountable to any congressional oversight.
Which could be why, on January 24, 2002, Cheney asked Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle for no investigation into the worst terror attack in American history. For 14 months, the Bush administration continued to hinder and obstruct any public investigation of 9/11 until public pressure forced the creation of the Keene 9/11 Commission, which was then manipulated by Bush insider Philip Zelikow and severely underfunded. Bush and Cheney then refused to testify to the commission unless they are questioned together, behind closed doors, without taking an oath, and with no notes taken or records kept. All of this information taken together builds a compelling case that the key members of the Bush administration, namely Dick Cheney and his close associates, at the very least knew the 9/11 attack was coming and took steps to ensure its success for personal and political benefit. Dick Cheney had a clear motive for the attack, was in a position to facilitate the attack, and is implicated by evidence of witness testimony of involvement. One must only ask why this information is not public knowledge and why formal charges have not been made against him. Please join the growing number of patriots, scholars, and government officials who question the official 9/11 story and demand honest answers.